Identical twins, what are your best "That wasn't me, that was my twin" stories? Story 1. I'm not a twin, but my girlfriend's mom is. For about a year, I had been living with my girlfriend's family due to some issues at home. They had fully accepted me as part of the household, and since they were a laid-back family, I had no problem walking around in my underwear while doing laundry or whatever. One day, my girlfriend's mom went out for a bit. Later, the doorbell rang, and I saw her standing on the porch. Thinking she had forgotten her keys, I opened the door and joked, "Ooh, a half-naked man." Then, without missing a beat, I added, "Could be fully naked for the right price." She laughed, stepped inside, and walked into the living room. That's when I realized she wasn't my girlfriend's mom, she was her twin sister. As she told her twin about how a strange man had just propositioned her at the front door, I stood there, stunned, doing the most intense double take of my life. Thankfully, after the initial shock, she found the humor in it, eventually. Story 2. I was dating a girl, Jill, who had an identical twin sister, Megan. While they looked exactly alike, their personalities were completely different. Jill was more tomboyish and outdoorsy. We had been together for about a year, though it was more of a long summer fling than anything serious. One day, Jill and Megan decided to swap lives for a week just for fun. They even got matching haircuts and traded clothes to fully commit to the switch. I had no idea any of this was happening. That week, I asked who I thought was Jill to go out with me to our town's weekly concert in the park, followed by some house parties. This was something we did all the time, so it felt completely normal. Unbeknownst to me, though, I was actually spending the entire night with Megan. She played the role perfectly. She knew all the things Jill and I talked about, our inside jokes, and even things we had planned for the future. I never suspected a thing. After the concert, we partied for a while, then eventually ended up at the beach, where we took things further, as Jill and I often did, since our parents were always home. Afterward, I dropped Megan off at her house, kissed her goodnight, and went home. The next day, Megan, probably feeling smug about how well she pulled it off, decided to brag to Jill, including details about our night together. I showed up at work the next morning. Jill and I both taught sailing at the same place, and the moment she saw me, she lost it. She was furious, calling me a cheater and demanding to know how I could do such a thing. I was completely blindsided. How was I supposed to know? Megan deserved an Oscar for that performance. Turns out, Megan had secretly had a crush on me for a while. That had nothing to do with the twin swap, but it sure made things messier. Jill was so angry she stopped speaking to her sister for a while, and as for us, we broke up. Not that it mattered much. Summer was almost over anyway. Story 3. Back in high school, my twin brother and I decided to pull a classic twin prank. I had him sit in my seat before class started. For the first 10 minutes, everything was going smoothly. The teacher, completely unaware I had a twin, didn't suspect a thing. Then I walked in late. She froze, staring at both of us in complete shock. The whole class went silent. Seizing the moment, I pointed at my brother and shouted, "Who the hell is in my seat?" Without missing a beat, my brother jumped up and yelled, "You're supposed to be Dad." We dramatically fought over which one of us was the real before he bolted out of the classroom. I calmly sat down like nothing had happened. The students lost it, laughing so hard they could barely breathe. The teacher, completely dumbfounded, didn't figure out what had happened until my brother and I stopped by at the end of the day to explain. Totally worth it. Story 4. My mom and her sister aren't twins, but they look and sound identical on the phone. Back when my dad was first dating my mom, he somehow got her sister's number. Thinking he was calling my mom, he started flirting and even asked her out. She agreed. He picked her up for the date and still didn't realize he had the wrong sister until they were halfway to their destination. By that point, he figured it would be too awkward to admit the mix-up, so he just played it cool, and that's how I exist today. Story 5. I once photographed a wedding where the groom had an identical twin. At some point during dinner, the groom stepped away from the table. While he was gone, guests started clinking their glasses, signaling for the couple to kiss. The bride, seeing his empty chair, just shrugged, so the best man, aka the groom's twin, smoothly slid into his seat and dramatically kissed her. When the groom returned and saw his twin kissing his wife, he acted outraged, starting a fake fight. It all ended with him being dipped and kissed by his own brother. Classic twin hijinks. Story 6. I'm one half of an identical twin set, and even at 47 years old, we still cause chaos whenever we're together. Our parents mix us up, our siblings mix us up, our wives mix us up, even our kids get confused sometimes. We just refer to ourselves as spare parts at this point. Sorry, Mom. Story 7. As identical twins, my brother and I got away with a lot as kids. Our most used excuse? My brother did it. We said it so much that it's still a running joke in our family, even though we're now in our 30s. In high school, our girlfriends would sometimes walk up, hold hands, or even snuggle the wrong twin. The moment they realized, they would freak out. Our close friends could always tell us apart, but new girlfriends? Not so much. As adults, we worked a few miles apart for a while. It was common for random coworkers to strike up conversations with me thinking I was my brother. Hey, brother's name, that report you filed last week was wild. Other times, my coworkers would come back from lunch and excitedly tell me I had a twin, as if I had somehow never noticed. We live in different states now, so it doesn't happen as often. But when I visit him, his neighbors are always taken aback at how identical we are. Story 8. I was at a local bar when a drunk girl stormed over and slapped me across the face. Then, in an instant, she froze. Her expression changed from anger to absolute horror. She realized she had slapped the wrong twin. And then, she started crying uncontrollably on my shoulder. Let's just say I had a lot to talk about with my brother after that. Story 9. Identical twin here. Back in high school, my twin brother and I had some of the same teachers for subjects like chemistry and history. Since we had a reputation for being pranksters, our teachers got used to our antics. One day in history class, things took an unexpected turn. I was sitting in class, probably being a bit of a smartass, when my teacher, Miss M, suddenly accused me of being my brother. Let's call him Gus. I insisted that I was, in fact, myself, but she wasn't buying it. My classmates saw an opportunity for chaos and decided to take sides. Some swore I was where I was supposed to be, while others insisted I was Gus. With no clear way to tell us apart, Miss M threatened to call the office to settle the matter. She made the call, confirming with Gus's teacher that he was indeed in his own classroom at that very moment. Just as Miss M hung up the phone, the door flew open and in walked Gus, carrying a box of Lucky Charms. I swear Miss M nearly fell out of her chair. Story 10. Not mine, but my mom's. My mom is an identical twin. She and her sister once went on a cruise together. Now my aunt is obsessed with birds. She knows everything about them. She ended up hitting it off with one of the tour guides, impressing him with her bird knowledge even outside of the actual tours. One day, my mom was standing at the edge of the ship, looking out over the water, when the tour guide approached her, thinking she was her sister. "What kind of ducks do you think those are?" he asked. My mom, who knows nothing about birds, just stared for a second before saying, ducky ducks?" The tour guide looked baffled. "What?" She laughed and replied, "You're confusing me with my sister. She's the bird expert." Then she just walked away, leaving him thoroughly confused. Story 11. Not exactly on topic, but still a funny twin story. My 10th grade history teacher once pulled an elaborate prank on his students. He had a friend Photoshop 2 pictures of him together to make it look like he had an identical twin. He kept the joke going by telling all his classes elaborate and completely made up stories about his twin. But the best part, whenever a student ran into him outside of school and greeted him, he would shake his head and say, "Oh, you must be thinking of my brother." Sorry for the confusion. It was his way of avoiding small talk with students, and it worked every time. Story 12. Being an identical twin has led to plenty of funny situations, especially since my twin and I went to the same schools all the way through university, worked at the same video store for 5 years, and shared most of the same friends until we moved to different cities. Here are a couple of my favorites. About 10 years ago, an older woman came into the video store where we worked. She seemed irritated with me from the start, and before long, she started berating me for constantly changing my appearance. She accused me of messing with people's heads by frequently altering my hair color, length, piercings, and even my voice. I honestly couldn't tell if she was more upset about the unconventional hair and piercings or the idea that someone would change so dramatically all the time. Eventually, I calmly informed her that she had actually been seeing my identical twin, who also worked there. The moment I said it, she went silent, avoided eye contact, and never came back to the store again. Another time, about 2.5 years ago, I was hiding in a back room at my wedding venue, waiting for guests to arrive. My twin was running around making sure everything was in order. One of my old bosses, who had become a friend, arrived with his teenage kids and girlfriend. At some point, he saw my twin walk across the room and, momentarily forgetting she existed, told his family they should go over and congratulate me. But before they could, they watched in shock as I greeted and kissed some guy they had never seen before, her fiancé. My husband is white, and my twin's fiancé is mixed race, so my boss had a moment of pure confusion, thinking, I knew this wedding was going to be casual, but not that casual. Then it clicked. He had been looking at my twin the whole time. He still tells that story every time we see each other. Story 13. Before I met my current girlfriend, my twin jokingly told her I was from Ukraine. She actually believed him, despite knowing we were identical twins and that he spoke perfect English. We also like to blame small things on each other, just to see if our mom will fall for it. Story 14. My mom is an identical twin. Back in high school, she and my aunt would swap classes and take each other's tests. My mom was better at math, while my aunt excelled in English and literature. They even broke up with each other's boyfriends when needed. There were also identical triplets at my high school, but I didn't realize it at first. It finally clicked at homecoming when I saw her wearing 3 different dresses throughout the night. Story 15. Not my story, but my roommate started dating a guy who looked eerily familiar. It took me a while, but I eventually realized why. I had hooked up with him multiple times. They had been dating for over a month, and she really liked him. I wasn't sure how to bring it up without making things awkward. Finally, I just decided to be honest and told her I had been involved with him before. She just smiled and said, "Oh, that was his identical twin. You were with his brother." Turns out her boyfriend had already told her about it. Still pretty embarrassing on my end. Story 16. I have an identical twin brother. We went to college at different schools, and one weekend he came to visit me. He arrived early and crashed on my couch while I was still at work. My girlfriend, whom I had only been dating for a few weeks, didn't know what time I got off work and decided to surprise me by coming over. She walked in, saw who she thought was me asleep on the couch, and thinking she was being affectionate, started kissing my neck, rubbing my shoulders, and, when I didn't wake up, slipped her hand down my pants. That's when my brother groggily opened his eyes, rubbed the sleep out of them, and said, "Hi. What's your name?" Since we were still in the early stages of dating, I had never mentioned having a twin. She immediately freaked out and started screaming just as I walked through the door. Through tears, she frantically apologized, insisting she hadn't been cheating on me, then instantly switched gears and started calling me an asshole for not telling her I had a clone. Meanwhile, my brother and I were on the floor, laughing hysterically. Story 17. Let me start by saying that my twin brother and I look exactly alike. Back when I was 13, I got into trouble a lot, mostly minor things like trespassing and vandalism. One summer, I got picked up by the police for being out past curfew, and they took me home. When I went to juvenile court, the magistrate was fed up, saying he was sick of seeing me, and that next time I'd be going to juvenile detention. He gave me probation and sent me on my way. Now, my twin had never been in trouble before, but a few weeks later, he was caught hanging out with some friends who were spray painting something. Even though he wasn't actually doing anything, he got charged with vandalism. When the cops asked for his name, he told them the truth, but they didn't believe him. They assumed he was me lying to get out of trouble, so they wrote my name down instead. A little while later, we got a letter in the mail summoning me to court. My brother and I had to go together to sort it out. The magistrate had just seen me a week prior and wasn't even going to bother with the other cases ahead of me. I'll never forget the panic on my face when I realized what was happening. It took forever to convince him that I wasn't the one in trouble this time. Story 18. I've got tons of twin mix-up stories. In college, my brother and I attended different schools, but one day, a classmate of mine saw him in a shared building and started talking to him about an assignment. My brother told her she had the wrong guy, but she turned bright red and walked away without saying another word. Another time, someone still didn't believe him, even after he showed both his license and mine. At a grocery store, some guy I had never met started chatting with me like we were old friends. When I realized he thought I was my brother and corrected him, he just stared at me and yelled, "Get the fucking out of here." I laughed and said, "Yeah, I gotta go." I've also used my brother's ski pass a few times. Since some mountains only scan tickets at the first lift, I'd take the pass, ride up, hand it off to my brother, take a short halfway run, and meet him and a friend at the top so we could snowboard all day. Story 19. Identical twin here. We got all the classic mix-ups growing up. Even now, if I hear my brother's name, I instinctively turn because there's a good chance the person is actually talking to me. One time, I even took a drug test for him. I wasn't smoking at the time, but he was, so he sent me in his place. The only problem? I didn't know his social security number. When they asked, I just said I didn't remember it. Almost slipped up and wrote my own name on the form too, but I caught myself, scribbled out the first letter, and wrote his instead. Meanwhile, my brother was chilling in the car, smoking a joint the entire time. Story 20. When I was little, I was adopted by amazing parents who sadly passed away in a car accident. I went on to finish college, marry my girlfriend, and have a wonderful son. Then, out of nowhere, I was arrested, accused of multiple assaults I had nothing to do with. To make it worse, my wife actually believed I was guilty. Thankfully, during the investigation, detectives uncovered something shocking. I had a twin brother I had never met. He had been following me my entire life and had even gotten a matching yin-yang tattoo in the exact same spot as mine. Turns out, he had been committing these crimes all along, knowing that if he were caught, he could shift the blame onto me. Apparently, he had been in contact with our biological mother, who told him about me. He's in prison now. Story 21. I had just returned to my original high school after spending most of my junior year being homeschooled and working full-time. There were these new, ridiculously attractive, identical twin sisters at school, and I had a class with one of them, the one I found more attractive. She was funny and comfortable enough with me from the start to joke around in a playfully aggressive way, and I played along. What I didn't know was that she had a twin. One day at lunch, I spotted who I thought was her, holding a plate of spaghetti. Trying to be funny, I ran up to her with my phone like it was a knife and shouted, "I told you the spaghetti would get you cut," a reference to an inside joke we had. I have never seen someone look so horrified in my life. Even worse, her real sister was standing right behind her, absolutely losing it with laughter. It was beyond awkward. Story 22. Back in college, I was randomly called into the campus safety office for something they called a public disturbance. Confused, I walked in and sat down, only for them to play a security video of my brother from the previous weekend, squatting on the steps of a building and leaving behind, let's just call it an unpleasant surprise. I immediately burst out laughing. The guy in charge, however, was not amused. From the look on his face, I'm pretty sure he was on the cleanup crew. All I could say was, his bad. Story 23. In the city where I live, I apparently have a twin. We have the same style of clothing, the same makeup and hair, and people constantly mistake me for her. Even my own sister once thought I was ignoring her on a bus, only to realize later that it wasn't me at all. This has been happening for years, and I have never seen this girl. The most recent sighting, I stopped by a quiet bar after work for a quick drink. The bartender looked at me confused and said, "Back so soon? You were just here?" I told him I had never been there before, and after a few moments of disbelief, he was convinced. I rushed out of the bar, hoping to finally see this girl for myself, but once again, she was nowhere to be found. Story 24. In high school, I had a sort of friend named Jed. He was kind of a jerk, but I didn't really care. What he didn't know was that I had an identical twin brother who also went to our school. One day, my brother told me that some random guy walked up to him, grabbed the soda he was drinking, took a huge gulp, burped, and said, "Hey, thanks, our last name." Then he just walked off. We weren't very close back then, so a lot of people didn't realize we were twins. In fact, one girl, a straight-A honors student, genuinely thought I was changing my hair color every day between second and third period. Story 25. My physics teacher, Mr. D, has a twin brother who lives in another country. Hardly anyone at school knew this. One day, his brother came to visit, and the two of them decided to pull a prank. His twin showed up to class in his place. Everything seemed normal at first, but then he started mispronouncing names during attendance. He also looked slightly different. His hair was a little off. The whole class was starting to get suspicious when suddenly the real Mr. D burst through the door and shouted, "Hey, what are you doing?" The entire class freaked out. Best lesson ever. Story 26. Not my story, but still a great twin mix-up moment. In high school, a guy named Bob started dating a girl named Anne, who had an identical twin sister named Aria. When I say identical, I mean identical. Even people who had known them for years couldn't always tell them apart. Bob and Anne dated through senior year and into college. During that time, he naturally spent a lot of time around both Anne and Aria. Eventually, Bob and Anne went to different colleges, grew apart, and broke up. A few months later, Bob was at a party when he saw Anne, or so he thought. Excited, he snuck up behind her, hugged her, and she turned around and kissed him. Only, it wasn't Anne, it was Aria. Turns out, Aria had gone to the same college as Bob and had been secretly in love with him since high school. Fast forward a few years, Bob and Aria got married last year. Story 27. In Belgium, there were these twin brothers who needed to get their driver's licenses. One of them was great at driving, while the other was terrible. Naturally, they came up with a plan. The skilled driver took the test for both of them. Both passed. Story 28. My identical twin sister had gotten out of the shower and had her hair wrapped up in a towel. My boyfriend, thinking it was me, walked up behind her and grabbed her. She set him straight real quick. Up until that point, he had always insisted that we didn't look that much alike despite us being identical twins. I argued that the only real difference was our hair. He just didn't notice because I always wore mine down. That little mix-up? Yeah, that changed his mind. Story 29. My twin brother and I started a company together. Then, he cut me out of it completely and left me high and dry. I didn't hear from him for a while. Not long after, I heard he got arrested for embezzlement. Then, he escaped. And guess what? The police mistook me for him and arrested me in his place. Story 30. I don't have a twin, but my two uncles are identical twins, and they've had their fair share of mistaken identity moments. One time, my uncle was at the barber shop getting a haircut when a man walked up to him and started talking about some art exhibition he'd seen him at the other day. My uncle, confused, told him he hadn't been to any exhibitions lately, The man just laughed and said, "Well, if it wasn't you, it must have been your evil twin." He wasn't exactly wrong. Story 31. I'm an identical twin, and for most of our childhood, only our parents could tell us apart. Even by junior high, the main way people distinguished us was by the way we dressed. Back in first grade, I was unfairly singled out by a teacher for kicking a girl on the playground. I denied it over and over, but she didn't believe me. After school, she made me write on the board that I would keep my hands to myself during recess or something like that. I cried the whole time. It never even crossed my mind that someone had mixed me up with my twin. It wasn't until I got home that we finally sorted it out. By junior high, mix-ups were more common, but one stands out. There was a guy named Jeff who apparently didn't like me but was cool with my brother. One day, Jeff walked out of class and punched my brother, thinking it was me. The funny thing, I had no idea Jeff disliked me. He never said a word before or after that day, and we never had any issues. My brother was stunned, and Jeff became the laughingstock of the school for attacking someone he actually liked without confirming who it was first. In 9th grade, my brother and I decided to swap classes for a day. We carefully planned everything, making sure we didn't have any tests or anything too important. It was an eye-opener to see how some people who hated me were friendly with my brother. I tried to act the part, but small things gave me away, like asking where to sit. By the end of the day, the whole school knew except for the teachers. Or so we thought. My 7th period English teacher was in her first year after teaching at a university. She was strict, flunked so many students she had to go back and change grades, and generally made class miserable. My brother walked into her class, sat down in my seat, and was immediately met with, "All right, time for your oral book report." The book? Something completely obscure and of course worth half my grade. My brother froze. He quickly admitted the truth, and instead of getting mad, the teacher laughed and carried on with the lesson. Looking back, knowing how strict she was made that moment even funnier. Story 32. During my junior year of high school, I came home late from lacrosse practice and found my parents sitting at the kitchen table, looking worried. I figured I'd just grab some food and relax for the night. But the second they saw me, they completely freaked out. My mom was hysterical. My dad rushed over like I was about to collapse. Confused, I tried to calm them down, but they wouldn't listen. Then my mom shouted that I had been hit by a car. Apparently, a neighbor had just called them, claiming they had seen me get hit and then casually walk away. I tried to explain that I was fine and clearly hadn't been in any accident, but my parents were convinced I was lying and kept demanding the truth. And just then, right on cue, my twin brother limped through the front door. Story 33. This one isn't super exciting, but here goes. My boss has an identical twin. They keep the same hairstyle, dress alike, and even act similarly. At their high school graduation, they decided to switch places. When they walked across the stage, they each accepted the other's diploma. No one ever found out. Story 34. My grandfather had an identical twin, and their names were John and Leighton. During World War II, John got drafted while Leighton stayed home. At the time, John had a decent job, while Leighton's job wasn't great. So while John was away, Leighton pretended to be him, took over his job, and even got promoted. When John finally returned home, instead of switching back, he just told Leighton to keep the job. From that point on, John started going by Jack, and Leighton continued being John for the rest of his life. To this day, my grandfather is still known as Jack. Story 35. My older brother and I looked nearly identical. When we moved to a small redneck town, we were the only non-white people there. We're Chinese Islander. Naturally, people kept asking if we were twins. We decided to have some fun with it. We told everyone that yes, we were twins, but I had been held back 2 years because I was the evil, troublemaking twin. They totally believed us. Story 36. Senior year of high school, my twin and I were in the same U.S. history class. The teacher was handing back our unit exams, and I should note, my brother always outscored me on tests. There's always a smarter twin, right? But that day, things were different. I got my test back, glanced at my score, then compared it with my brother's. To my absolute delight, I had finally beaten him. Overwhelmed with triumph, I let out a loud whoop and stood up with my arms stretched out in victory. Then my brother took a closer look at his test and started laughing. The teacher had switched our papers. I sheepishly sat back down. Since then, I've had better test scores and learned to care less about grades, and we've gone our separate ways in college. But nothing will ever beat that brief, sweet taste of false victory. Story 37. Since my twin and I went to different universities, we ended up with separate friends and social circles. This led to countless awkward encounters where people mistook me for my brother, making me look like either a jerk or someone with serious memory issues. One of the worst mix-ups happened at my graduation. While I was having my photo taken, One of my former lecturers spotted my brother in the crowd and ran up to congratulate him on graduating. My brother politely explained that he wasn't me, but she wasn't having it. She insisted she had been my professor, ignoring my brother's attempts to correct her. Eventually, she gave up and walked away, probably thinking I had some kind of short-term memory disorder. Later, when I heard about it, I tried tracking her down to explain. But after searching for a while, I had to give up. To this day, she likely still believes I either rudely ignored her or completely forgot an entire class I took. Another time, I got my twin a temp job at the front desk of the office where I worked. Chaos ensued. Since my twin has a beard and I don't, my coworkers were utterly confused, thinking I had not only grown a beard overnight, but also switched jobs. People would approach him like we were the same person, ask him to do tasks, and then later get frustrated when I had no recollection of them. Even after we explained, the confusion didn't end. Months after my twin left the job, people were still wondering why I had switched back. Story 38. Over the years, I've had my butt squeezed multiple times by my twin sister's boyfriends. I was extremely shy back then, so unfortunately, this was probably the height of my romantic interactions for a while. Story 39. Freshman year of high school, my twin brother thought it would be hilarious to start a rumor that I had a particular niche interest, specifically that I enjoyed, well, let's just say I had a very specific preference when it came to intimate activities. To him, this was the funniest thing in the world. The problem? No one could remember which twin was supposed to be into it, so instead of just me getting the reputation, people just assumed both of us had the same unusual taste. So now, thanks to my brother, our high school legacy is forever tainted. Thanks, Robert. Story 40. Identical twin here. I live in San Francisco. My brother still lives in Missouri. A few years ago, after seeing Ghost Rider in theaters, I was waiting at a bus stop with my girlfriend when I noticed a guy walking past, staring at me. We joked that maybe he was checking me out. Then, out of nowhere, he walked right up to me and shouted, "Brother's name. What the hell are you doing in San Francisco?" Clearly, this guy had no idea my brother had a twin, so I did what anyone would do in that situation. I lied. I don't remember exactly what I said, but I went along with it, telling him how I had left Missouri, moved to SF, and was working here now. I asked about his life, made some small talk, and that was that. A week later, I had completely forgotten about the interaction until my brother messaged me. Apparently, I had unknowingly met and lied straight to his old college RA. Story 41. One of my elementary school teachers was a twin, but I had no idea. One day, I saw who I thought was my teacher at the grocery store. Excited, I ran up to her and said hi, only for her to give me a funny look and walk away without saying a word. So there I was, an 8-year-old kid standing in the middle of Kroger, convinced my teacher hated me so much she wouldn't even acknowledge me outside of school. The next day, I walked into class, and there she was, acting as friendly and bubbly as ever. Confused, I said, "Wow, you must have been in a bad mood at Kroger yesterday. I'm glad you're happy again today." She looked completely baffled and told me she hadn't gone to Kroger at all. Then she casually mentioned she had a twin sister. Now, if you were an elementary school teacher with a twin, wouldn't you expect random kids to come up to you in public and mistake you for your sibling? Wouldn't you just have a go-to response like, "Oh, you must be thinking of my sister"? Instead, her sister just walked away, leaving me, and apparently several other kids, as I later found out, feeling like a total loser. Story 42. As an identical twin, I often get mistaken for my sister. Sometimes people say hi to me, and I respond, assuming I must know them and just forgot. We'll have a full-on conversation before I realize they think I'm my twin. By that point, it's way too awkward to admit I have no idea who they are, so I just pretend to be my sister and carry on. This happens to both of us at least once a month, especially since we're on campus at the same time. Even worse, people will come up to me demanding to know why I've been ignoring them, thinking they've been trying to talk to me when they were actually talking to my sister, who, of course, had no clue. Story 43. During my freshman year of college, my twin sister came to visit. We had both taken 6 years of Italian in middle and high school, so I had the brilliant idea to have her sit in for me in my Italian 101 class. The only real difference between us at the time was that her hair was much shorter than mine, but one of my friends in the class vouched for her, so it worked. Halfway through the lesson, the professor started calling on students to read aloud. When it was my turn, my sister read the passage flawlessly. That's when the professor stopped everything and in perfect Italian called her out. Without missing a beat, she responded in Italian, admitting that she was actually my twin, visiting for the week. The professor nodded and said, "I knew it wasn't you because she is much better at Italian than you are." Ouch. No one else in class understood a word of the exchange, but the next time I showed up, I made sure to wear my hair down just to be safe. Story 44. My dad has an identical twin. Back in the 1970s, my parents visited my uncle in Michigan. He ran an assisted living home for adults with disabilities, and one of his employees happened to spot my dad at the movies with my mom. The employee stormed over and accused my dad of cheating on his wife, thinking he was actually my uncle. Without missing a beat, my dad deadpanned, "Oh, don't worry, this is just one of my residents I'm taking out for a movie." My mom? Not amused. She took the car and left him there. My dad had to take a cab all the way home to an entirely different town. Story 45. In high school, I was in a drama class with mostly younger students, so I didn't know a lot of people. One day, I was chatting with a girl when she casually mentioned her sister. I was surprised and said, "Oh, you have a sister?" She looked at me like I was insane. "Yeah," she said, "she's in this class." Turns out she had an identical twin, and I had spent a whole month thinking they were the same person. To be fair, we had school uniforms, and they wore their hair the same way every day, but still, I felt pretty dumb. Story 46. I have an identical twin. One day in high school, we randomly ran into each other in the bathroom during class. Since our school was huge, it was a rare coincidence. My brother, always up for trouble, asked if I wanted to switch classes for fun. It sounded like a great idea, so we swapped jackets and headed off in each other's directions. When I walked into his art class, sat down, and blended in easily, the teacher had no idea. My good friend in the class definitely knew, but he played along. Meanwhile, my brother was supposed to go to my theater class. Instead, he just ditched. Classic. Story 47. My twin brother once stole a magazine from Albertsons. As we were leaving, a security guard stopped me, convinced I was the one who had taken something. The guy pulled up my shirt, expecting a stolen Nintendo Power to fall out. I was terrified. I was only 12. Before I could even react, my mom grabbed the guy's arm and did one of those behind-the-back judo takedowns. It was insane. The store security kept insisting I had stolen something, but when they checked me, they found nothing. My mom? She called my real troublemaking brother over. Story 48. I avoided detentions all throughout school by pretending to be my twin. Eventually, the teachers just gave up. They got so tired of trying to track down the right twin that they just let things slide. The best part? When I graduated, I got a certificate congratulating me for having 0 detentions on record. My twin sister, on the other hand, was not amused. Story 49. In high school, I had a crush on a girl and finally worked up the nerve to ask her out. Turns out, she had an identical twin. I accidentally asked the twin out instead. I was too embarrassed to ask out the actual girl I liked after that, so I just let it go. Story 50. My college friends were identical twins. One of them started dating a girl who was also a twin. Naturally, our entire friend group kept pushing the other twins to start dating each other, thinking it would be so cool and super weird. Spoiler, it wasn't. Story 51. My dad is an identical twin. Years ago, he got a DUI and lost his license. A few months later, he got pulled over again. Instead of giving the officer his own info, he gave his twin brother's license number. My uncle had no idea until he got a ticket in the mail, summoning him to court for a DUI. He eventually got everything sorted out, but to this day, he still gives my dad hell for it. Story 52. My dad and uncle are identical twins and were both doctors. They even shared a medical practice. One day, my dad admitted to me that there were several occasions when one of them couldn't make it to an appointment, so the other would step in and see the patient instead. Apparently, doctors get very good at pretending they know their patients, even if they see thousands of them a year. Story 53. Back in high school, there was a set of triplets, but I only really knew one of them. They all had different hairstyles, so it was easy to tell them apart if you knew them well enough. A few years later, I saw one of them at the mall. I considered saying hello, but quickly did the math. I had a 1 in 3 chance of reconnecting with a friend and a 2 in 3 chance of awkwardly bothering a stranger. I decided to take no action. Story 54. My twin and I go to the same university, and people constantly think I'm being rude when they wave at me, and I either don't respond or give them a weird look. We're so tired of explaining that we're actually 2 different people that we're making shirts that say, "You're staring at the wrong twin." At this point, it happens daily. Story 55. One of my favorite twin pranks involved a long, well-planned setup. I'm a nurse, and I work with dialysis patients. Since we see them regularly for months or even years, we get to know them really well. Some of the older guys like to flirt a little, not in a creepy way, just in a playful, harmless way. One patient, Gary, was particularly fond of teasing me after he found out I had a twin. So, I hatched a plan. When my sister came to visit, she lived on the other side of the country. I had her dress in my scrubs and come to work with me. I told her exactly where Gary would be sitting and prepped her with small talk. She walked over, introduced herself as me, and started chatting. A few minutes later, I crept up behind her, leaned over her shoulder, and said, "Gary, haven't I told you never to flirt with someone who looks like me?" I wish I had a picture of his face. He turned beet red, muttered, "Well, I'll be damned," and went completely speechless. If you knew Gary, you'd know how shocking that was. Once he recovered, he absolutely loved the prank and told the story to everyone for weeks. It was easily one of the best twin moments of my life. Story 56. A few Christmases ago, my twin brother was visiting town, and I had volunteered to play Santa at a church event. Before the big moment, we pulled a switch. My brother, dressed as Santa, went out and played the part. Meanwhile, I stayed hidden in the back. People were whispering, trying to guess who was under the costume. Most assumed it was me. Right as he was about to leave, I burst into the room and yelled, "Sorry, I couldn't find the costume. Has anyone seen a black garment bag with a red suit?" The entire room went dead silent. My brother, still in full Santa mode, just laid a finger aside his nose, gave a nod, and walked out with a big, "Ho, ho, ho." The adults' reactions were priceless. Story 57. When my twin and I were in school, we used to swap classes all the time. She'd go to my science class, I'd go to her art class, and all our classmates were in on the joke. One day, though, we didn't switch. We were both in our actual assigned classes when some classmates decided to mess with us. They told the teacher that we were mid-swap even though we weren't. We got pulled out of class, accused of switching, and no matter how much we insisted we hadn't done anything this time, no one believed us. They had no proof, though, so we got away with it. Story 58. My dad has an identical twin, and we have a framed photo of his brother with his wife and kids hanging in our house. When guests ask about it, I always say, "That's my dad's second family." Since we're Americanized immigrants from Canada, people actually believe it when I add, "You can marry one person per country." Story 59. My brother and I went to separate schools too, and I quote, "prevent shenanigans." The only real outcome? Anytime I did something that seemed even slightly out of character, my classmates would immediately accuse me of being my twin. Story 60. My twin majored in neuroscience. I majored in biology. People constantly mistook me for her. They'd launch into long, excited conversations about neuroscience, and I'd try to stop them, telling them they had the wrong twin. The response was always, "Haha, yeah, right," until my sister walked up beside me. The looks on their faces were priceless. Some looked like they were about to faint. Story 61. My twin and I went to the same high school and college, so people mixed us up all the time. It took me an entire semester of freshman year to realize that I was losing friends because of it. Some classmates thought I was super friendly in one class, but cold and distant in another. Turns out they didn't know I had a twin and assumed I was only talking to them when it was convenient. So they got bitter and stopped talking to me altogether. It still happens every now and then. Story 62. On a college campus where most people only know each other casually, nobody realizes you're a twin until they've already experienced multiple confusing encounters. The moment they do figure it out, they start approaching more cautiously. But before that, they'll confidently wave at you thinking you're their friend until you stare at them blankly and they start questioning everything. Even when they realize their mistake, it still feels more natural to approach someone who looks like their friend rather than a total stranger. Story 63. My twin sister and I live in the same village, but since she has 2 kids, everyone knows her. One day I was out walking with my husband when a woman pushing a stroller gave me a friendly "hi." Then she noticed I was holding hands. Rumors about my sister cheating on her husband started spreading. Let's just say things got awkward at the school gates. Story 64. My grandfather and his twin brother were a menace together. His brother's wife still tells stories about waking up in the morning, finding my grandfather sitting at the table, drinking coffee with her hungover husband and his friends, and trying to explain how he didn't pick a fight at the bar the night before. Oh, and he was still pulling this kind of stuff in his 70s. Did I mention he was a W-2 vet? Absolute legend. Story 65. My grandfather was an identical twin. Back in the day, he would drive from Syracuse, NY, where he lived, to Rutland, VT, where his brother lived, start trouble at the local bars, and then immediately drive back home. The next morning, my great-uncle would wake up to very confused and very angry friends. My grandfather never even gave him a heads up that he had been in town. I really miss that man. Story 66. My twin and I never really used our identicalness as an excuse, but it still led to a lot of chaos. High school drama, sophomore year, a guy I didn't know stormed up to me screaming, cursing, and flipping me off. Turns out my brother had insulted him in gym class 10 minutes earlier, and I just happened to walk by next. College confusion. Someone waved at me on campus. When I stared at them blankly, they got mad. "Don't you remember me? We met at random event." I tried explaining I was a different person, but they refused to believe me until I literally pulled out my student ID and held it up to my face. Best one yet. During my black belt test for Hapkido, one of the challenges was 3-on-1 sparring. My brother and I were in the same group. Our master called out a name, and the other 3 in the group immediately attacked. Then he called my name. Only they thought I was my brother. So instead of attacking me, they all rushed him. I decided to play along, calling out strategy like, "Get him, don't let him escape." Meanwhile, my poor brother was completely overwhelmed, trying to fend off 3 attackers. The entire crowd was dying with laughter. By the time they realized their mistake, the focus had already shifted to another person. Absolutely fantastic.